Hi everyone, and welcome to our second webinar, my collaboration with Claire from Inspire You. I'm Helen and I am Director and Founder of GoGecko Recruitment, and Claire and I share an absolute passion for people within organisations, both finding the right people and keeping the right people and treating them really well. And that's where this webinar collaboration has come from. We've also got Paul with us, and I will let him introduce himself to you shortly. Claire, do you want to say hi as well?
Yeah, so my name is Claire Elms and I'm from Inspire You. So we are really passionate about supporting individuals with their mental fitness, so helping people to become the best versions of themselves. And in organisations, that is really supporting everybody to work together and communicate really well. So we're really passionate about retention and really love just working with people who value their people. And it's all about people first these days. And yeah, really looking forward to finding out more from Paul today. So I'll pass you over to Paul.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul from High Bar HR, and I'm looking to raise the standard that small businesses and startups can expect from HR support. I've spent the last 6 years working with startups, scale-ups and small businesses, and during that time noticed too many in their most critical phase are either left with dull off-the-shelf templates or actually no HR support at all. And I'm set up High Bar HR to change that and help businesses achieve through their people. All right, well, thank you. I think this is a great topic, and I think especially in the fast-paced, changing climate we're in, especially with an election looming, actually resilience is a really key topic. So I'm really delighted to have been invited on to speak today. I attended the first session you did, and that was incredibly insightful. So you've certainly given me some big shoes to fill. What I wanted to just sort of caveat at the beginning is I think resilience is one of those topics that people spend their whole careers studying. You have psychologists, you have occupational behavioural psychologists who just focus on resilience. That's not me. Where I am going to try and add some value is actually looking at what does the research say, and how can you as a small business owner put some of these things into practice, and really looking to simplify things as much as possible. I think let's start with the different types of resilience. So we have firstly individual resilience, and this is an individual's ability to deal with high pressure, stress, and overcome those situations, and either keep going and perform, or actually respond really well to failure or adversity. Where I think this is really important for you as an organisation, and is thinking about how you set up an individual to succeed, and how you ensure that the resilience that they have is being spent in the things that benefit your organisation and not being wasted elsewhere. Resilience is something you can develop. It's something you can practice and increase, but it's not an infinite resource. And so, I'm sure Claire will come on a second into how individuals can build resilience. But the organisation, as I said, you've got to make sure it's being spent in the right ways. And an example I find quite helpful is if you think of, I'm a big football fan, in case the picture there doesn't give that away. But
I was there that day.
But if you think about how a Premier League team operates, for example, and I know people like to criticise, but they will get chartered flights or private jets to games. They will fly reasonably short distances, and we can have a kind of environment debate on that. But they will, they'll have masseuses, they'll have special player liaison managers. But what they're trying to do is trying to make sure that none of the physical or mental resilience a player has is being spent on anything apart from Saturday 3 p.m. I know it's a bit of an old fashioned, but Saturday 3 p.m. they want all of the resilience a player has to go into that moment. And I think there's something organisations can learn on that. Clearly, we're not going to start chartering private jets and flying our employees to work, but are your processes helping your employees? Is it really difficult for an employee to get data, get information, find templates? Do you have templates? All of these things can help ensure that actually what they're doing is dealing with the tricky situation and not the admin or the kind of bureaucracy that could actually use some of that resilience. The other thing that is important, and that's the last picture, is resilience is absolutely not putting up with toxic behavior, a toxic work environment, or a toxic manager. And I think this is where I see resilience, or the term resilience, either misused or used to justify an organisation not sorting problems out. And it's where employees resign, and they resign because of a manager, and the organisation explains this away as, the individual's not resilient enough. If you think about running your business, that is not a good use of an employee's resilience. It's not a good use of an employee's time, and it's not an acceptable reason for employees to be resigning. So let's not use resilience as just justifying toxic behaviour or bad management. Before I go on to team resilience, sort of Claire, is there anything you can add on building individual resilience or things?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, you said you don't come from that background. I very much do. So I come from the building individuals' resilience. How do we get people? What does resilience mean? Because it's a concept. So it's quite when people say, that person's got no resilience, or I've got no resilience. It's like, I think it's what tends to happen is the mental load just becomes too much. So it's usually because we're just not very adapted, dealing with complicated things and lots of big things in one go. And so one of the things that we really help people to look at is have a bit of self-awareness around where their resilience could improve, because nobody has 100% resilience. Everybody has a wobble. Even the most confident of people will have stuff that happens. The same with teams. There is always a process that could be improved. And I think that's where growth mindset really comes in, because if you've got people who are really difficult in terms of, maybe they're always going off sick, or you've got the toxic managers or whatever like that, it's horrible environment to work in. So it is kind of like looking at the things that can be done to make things easier within the organisation, which I know is what you're going to be focusing on today. But I think it is just that there is always room for growth, and no one has it perfect. And I think that's the key bit, even us in our businesses, there are always processes that can be slicker. There are always things that we can do to improve. And a lot of people find that they can't cope with that. So they struggle to recognise that they need to do things differently and grow and learn. So a big part of what we do is about learning within organisations. Helen, is there anything you want to say on that in terms of from a...
I was just going to say that resilience is often seen as strength, when actually it's more around, and it's very different depending on what job you do. There are lots of jobs that are client facing or external stakeholder facing, and those require a different type of resilience to an internal role where someone might be dealing with all the intricacies of compliance and processes and data. And maybe in a manufacturing role where they're on a line where they're constantly having to move product along. So I think resilience is very individual, even within a business environment, depending on the role that those people perform. But I think it's also good to come away from the word resilience to a degree and look at it about creating the best possible environment to be at your optimum level of flow in the skills and job that you're brilliant at, rather than being strong against adversity, so to speak.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's the biggest shift in society now, because I think old school thinking is resilience is everyone around you is burning out, you just keep going, and that's resilience. And I think what we're realizing now is it's not about that at all. It's about people being within their optimum flow, people understanding, their best way of working for them. And the fact that everyone's different on different days, you can be really on it one day and maybe only at 80% the next day. And so resilience will vary, it's a fluid entity. It's not something that, you're either resilient or you're not. There is like, everyone will have periods of time where they're really on it and periods of time where they're not.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've always thought about my own resilience through my career is a little bit like, it's a little bit like fitness almost, where actually it is something you can build, it is something you can develop, but you've got to put yourself through, you kind of got to put yourself in slightly uncomfortable situations to build that resilience. But again, the fitness analogy is you can't overdo it, because then you get injured or you burn out in the resilience example. So you've got to do it in that safe way. And I think that the best times I've developed or had my own resilience developed, and this is definitely a learning for organisations, is when, especially thinking back to being a graduate, for example, and I worked in a baked bean factory, so I had about 750 machine operators who I supported. It was a 100% unionised environment, and there were some really challenging, really high stressful situations and meetings with the union that I had to go to, and what my manager did, I'm blessed to have a brilliant manager in that situation, is they would never take the meeting off me. They would never step in and not let me do it. They knew I needed to be pushed, and they knew my capability, but also my resilience would be developed. But they fully supported me through that process. So I knew even if I made a big mistake in that meeting, my manager would have my back, and they would always debrief me after the meeting, and we'd have a good conversation before. They'd let me practice. So they gave me all of the support, all of the advice I needed. But what they didn't do is take that meeting off me. And I think that enabled me to know I could handle these stressful situations, manage these these challenging conversations, and it really built my resilience. So putting your employees in these situations, but giving them that kind of wraparound support, I think is absolutely key to building that resilience.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's where a lot of organisations, where they've got really good managers, will do that, because you recognise the strengths in your team and you recognise the weaknesses. And rather than just going, oh, that person can't do that, it's like actually nurturing and coaching that person through it.
Yeah.
I was the same. I hated presentations. So I remember a manager, like I used to go beetroot red, I'd read everything verbatim and get myself in a right old pickle. And a manager said to me, right, you're going to do this until you get it. And like every team meeting, she'd make me present something. And then I had somebody, when I first brought the business online, who was like, right, for 30 days, you are going live online every day for 30 days. Because I was like, I can't do it. I can't do this process. And then the more you do it, and it's a mindset thing, the minute you start shifting and you do it in practice, you create the neural pathway. And so that is amazing, isn't it? And I think, it is just how you develop that is amazing. And when you get the managers really doing that and supporting you, it creates a whole culture in the organisation that you can be vulnerable. And I think that is the thing that we're really noticing more now, is that people are being pushed into their out of their comfort zones a bit more. And that's really, as long as you do it in the right way, in a supportive way and nurturing, it makes such a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll talk about it when we come on to team resilience, but you have to have that trust and that confidence in your organisation and in your manager to be willing to make yourself vulnerable and put yourself in those situations. And I think you'll find if that trust isn't there in the organisation, then people won't be willing to do that, or they won't do as good a job. So that's absolutely key. I mean, I've worked with a number of teams, say, a lot of sales organisations or sales-based organisations I work with at the moment, but I've also worked with say M&A teams, and these are teams that work regularly till the early hours of the morning, and they'll be doing deals with next to no sleep for entire weeks. It's how can you recruit for people with high resilience? Because clearly those kind of jobs, and there's a whole raft of other jobs that require that resilience. But Helen, how have you looked at that, and how would you recruit or look for resilience in the recruitment process?
That's a really great question. We really encourage really good open questions, expecting stories of where people have dealt with resilience before. I've got one example of a lady who, and these examples can come from anywhere. I think it's keeping an open mind as to where resilience comes from as well. So for I had a lady recently who, when asked that question, came up with this brilliant example of where she'd worked for an absolutely diabolical hotel that fortunately no longer exists, so I can't name and shame, and I wouldn't anyway. But she was on reception for this hotel and had a client group come in. Room was dire, wasn't ready, and she had to completely think on her feet as to how to assist this family who were wanting a holiday that they weren't going to get at this hotel. And she gave a brilliant example of where she then had to think on her feet, think of a solution, went and managed to find them somewhere else to stay in on a very busy time of year where, she had to phone round, pull in contacts, really go above and beyond for this family who she didn't know, but she did because she felt strongly that it was part of her sense of duty to that family. And the example still gets repeated by my clients who interviewed her, who can't believe that she went through that in order to provide great customer service for someone. So it's asking really good open questions at the interview stage where you're getting people to demonstrate their skill level. They're not just saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, I'm resilient. Yes, I'm all right. But really digging deep in the process and getting candidates to be super vulnerable as well. Because if they are vulnerable and they give really good examples, they can handle most things. And that you can teach and train them in what you do as a business. But resilience and strength of character and good work ethic and all of that kind of stuff is difficult to teach. It comes from experience and built confidence.
Yeah, and what I really like about that as well is it's actually it's about really good quality or high quality interviewing. Too often I see interview processes where the managers the hiring manager can actually be quite aggressive and quite unpleasant during the recruitment process with the opinion that actually if I behave like that in the interview, I can test their resilience. But actually I think, and this goes with what you're saying, is that just creates a really unsafe environment for the candidate to be, and you're not really going to find a huge amount out about them. It's asking those quality questions, great follow-up that you're going to get to those examples. It's not creating an uncomfortable environment for them to be in.
And I think that's changed, hasn't it? That idea has really shifted.
Yeah.
I would say since COVID more. I don't know what you think, Helen, but I think prior to COVID, people were doing a lot of kind of almost grilling people at interviews and really asking really difficult questions about legal things or things that you're not likely to know, just to test to see whether you know these things, or have days and days of interview processes, which some companies still do with larger roles. But the interview process should be about working out whether the person fits within the culture rather than are they able to regurgitate information at an interview level. And I think that's the difference with now. It seems to have shifted a bit more. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I just think that it's not, interviewing is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. And there's been a definite shift, and I think Paul will come on to this later on in his presentation, about people being much more discerning about their choices from an employment point of view. So when you're walking into an interview room and you're being grilled about something that's completely irrelevant to the job you're doing, that sets red flags flying for that decision to take that job, even if you are the right person for the role. So it's all about making sure that the person that you're interviewing has plenty of opportunity to demonstrate their strengths and capability, whilst also you demonstrating the strengths and capability of the business for them. So it's very much a two-way street. And I think interviewing should be much more personal and much more about the individual and making them super comfortable, so you can get to that vulnerability and they let their guard down and you see the real person, which is very difficult to do in an hour. So which most interviews are around an hour. So it's a real skill to be able to do that and to get those those people to be able to demonstrate what you need to hear in order to think about whether they're right for the organisation or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of, and this won't translate to all organisations, but I'm a big fan of assessment centres. And I think actually, if you want a process that tests resilience, it's someone being there for a day, essentially, and being tested in a number of different ways. And I think just that constant testing, that process, you can still have great interviews in there as well. But that really tests someone's resilience to keep going for the whole day. Where I think that can translate to a smaller organisation is I really like testing sort of one or two different ways. So I think people can absolutely nail an interview. They're well rehearsed, they're well practiced in an interview. Now, the better interviewers can get around that and get to the truth. But actually, different types of assessments I think are really beneficial for organisations as well. And you may find someone is very resilient during an interview. You put data in front of them, or you ask them to present, and actually you get a very different story. An example I would use of that would be one organisation we were recruiting for a social media manager, and they flew through the interviews. They got to the final stage, they were brilliant, and the final stage was asking them to write a press release, and they could write, but their writing quality was really poor, and that was absolutely essential for the role, and they wouldn't have got to that had they not done a different type of assessment. So I think that can help you as well, test for different skills.
I also think Penn brings up a really good point about how do you test the resilience of people who do not cope with tests. And I think there is a big surge on the inclusive and diversity way of looking at a variety of different methods so that you're not missing out on those who are neurodiverse, who maybe have dyslexia, who maybe can't cope with assessments but are actually really, really good candidates for those roles. So it's also thinking outside the box a little bit, so that in a environment where, although we've got high levels of candidates, we are, it's not COVID times where we had no candidates. We've got high levels of candidates, but whittling those candidates down to the people that are actually the one for the role is maybe looking at more innovative ways of assessing, going back to resilience, of assessing resilience, because there are many different ways of assessing it.
Yeah.
One of my favourite questions to ask people is like thinking about your biggest failure. What is your biggest learning experience? Because when interviews ask what's your strengths and weaknesses, you don't get the information that you really want, because what you're looking for is everyone makes mistakes. Some people are better at coming back from that than others. And what I want to know is what's behind that. Like, how do you, when everything's sort of gone a bit wrong, how do you then bring yourself back through again? And I think that's one of the most powerful questions that I see people really asking to get that information in terms of resilience, because you can see straight away if somebody is like able to respond to that or not, if they're really struggling. And I think the key bit around that is when you're looking with the sort of testing different people. Like I'm just saying, like, if anyone said to me a test or an exam, like I failed my driving test God knows how many times, because as soon as it was test, I couldn't do it, and I went into a flustered state. And so the more you are able to test people in and ask kind of more normal questions, it does create that different vibe, doesn't it? And it makes you like really interested in the person, so kind of finding out really simple things about them on a personal level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I move to team resilience, which I think has a lot of similarities with individual resilience, but it's around can the team complete the task, complete the objective, but then I think also complete it in a way that means they can then work together again. And I think too often in team environments, it almost turns into, or when it's done badly, it turns into a bad episode of The Apprentice, where actually people aren't just focused on achieving the task. They're thinking about who are they going to blame at the end of it? Who can they make the scapegoat, or how do they cover themselves in a situation? And as a business owner, that's the worst situation you can have. You want that whole team focused on on achieving the objective and delivering value for your organisation. And I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. Firstly, the team need to believe that they can effectively complete the task together. And I think they can do that through clear roles and responsibilities and a clear definition of what needs to be done. And if you have that clarity, then when the pressure ramps up or when there's an unforeseen situation, the team know who's going to do what, and they trust that the person next to them is going to deliver what they need to deliver. That they're able to improvise, and they know the skills in the group, and they know who to turn to in different situations. And we've spoken about this a lot, but the key to that as well is trust and feeling safe, willing to share ideas with the team without fear of criticism or blame. Because if you don't have that, what you'll find is people will just give the safe answers because they know they're not going to get blamed. They know they're not going to be criticised. And your organisation is not going to progress if you only get the safe answers. You need that out of the box thinking. And it might be that 10, 20, 30 out of the box ideas are awful, but it's that one you need to really progress. And you need to create an environment where those 30 have been responded to well. So the person on the 31st time is willing to give that, that golden egg that you need. So thinking about, gentle rejection and really explaining and exploring an idea and not necessarily just dismissing it out of hand.
I think Lisa's got a question. She's asked, how do you manage toxic behaviour from a client that's affecting a staff member's resilience? Great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question, and the best examples of this are, I think, and I'll build on this, but I think the best examples are actually clients or companies now have started having almost behaviour charters for their clients, and this is the type of behaviour that we tolerate and don't tolerate. And there are some really powerful examples of businesses who stop working with clients who demonstrate that toxic behaviour, and that sends a really clear message of what they tolerate. We're in the real world. There's pragmatic. Not every business can do that. I understand that, but I think actually that sets a really powerful message to your team, and I think can make your team build that trust, build that accountability, build that sense of kind of ownership and engagement with the organisation. But I think that kind of behaviour does have to be called out. I think if you leave, you just get to a really unhealthy environment, and you might find, okay, you're keeping your client, but you're actually losing your employees, and that can be more detrimental than taking the hit on the client.
And ultimately, as an organisation, if you've got these core values and you've got internal processes for dealing with toxic behaviour with like managers or with team members, if you're not demonstrating that same ethos across the board with the clients you work with, then that is really, really detrimental to the business, isn't it? Because it's not aligning with your culture. And I think that's where a lot of the business foundations really come in terms of making sure that you're taking the right clients in the first place. It's a bit like recruitment, right? Like if you're not taking on the right type of client, then you will have a lot of these complexities that pop up. And, and there's differences between, I think, a whole organisation being particularly tricky and also like a particular person that's tricky as a client. And if it's somebody that's employed, then it is having that feedback with the organisation. Because I know if one of my employees was causing a problem with another organisation, I'd want to know about it. And I'm sure other companies feel the same, and they might not know that person is being toxic. So depending on obviously who it is, if it's the business owner, there's not a lot you can do about it. But what we are noticing is that sometimes it's actually like employees that are causing that and not business owners themselves.
Yeah, and I know certainly for my business, and I think there's a lot of businesses are the same way. Your clients don't pay you to say yes. Actually, your clients pay you to help their business perform better, and a lot of the time tell them the truth or uncover issues that they may not have seen. If you tolerate that kind of toxic behaviour, you'll get to a situation where your employees are just becoming yes people, and your business isn't delivering the value that it promised it would deliver. Your employees need to feel safe in order to do the best for your client. So it could actually be letting a client go, or risking a client by having a conversation with them actually delivers that long-term value for your organization.
I have an example of that. I had a client who was really, really upset me and was really toxic. And interestingly, I thought you take things really, really personally, and especially when you run your own business, you take things exceptionally personally, and you have no one to go to say, this company's being a nightmare, what do I do, apart from your peer group. And I worked through it. I was very upset about it. But recently I've had some feedback from internally in the company, because this guy isn't going anywhere. And I had to make a decision about whether I deal with him or not. And I've chosen not to deal with him. If I do business with the company again, it will be not dealing with him, we'll be dealing with other directors within the business. And one of the directors said to me that he felt that he was threatened by me because I was very professional and very good at what I did. And that's where the toxicity came from. And what it did, that was lovely for me, because it made me go, actually, I am okay. I am doing the best job I can. It's not me, it's him. And I think it's also backing your employees when they're in that kind of situation. If they're in the wrong, obviously that they need to accept some responsibility for that. But if they are not in the wrong and they're just like a sponge accepting all this horrendous, feedback, I think it's, as a business owner and as a manager, it's stepping in and saying enough, because we trust our employees, we know them, we back them, and that's not okay. And sometimes you get a lot of respect for it. Not every time, but a lot of the time they will respect you more, even if you have to walk away.
Yeah. And I think actually the great thing about your example as well is that you had then had the conversation with the director or the owner of that business. And I think if that toxicity is coming from one of their employees, think about if it was your own business, and you would absolutely want to know if one of your employees was making one of your clients feel like that, because that represents you and it represents your brand. So where it isn't the owner of the business or the kind of the client who is demonstrating that behavior, I think just making the owner aware, escalating that to them. And I've seen that in a number of cases, and you get a really positive response in vast majority of them from the business owner. And they are horrified to hear that one of their employees is making one of your employees feel like that.
I think toxic behaviour is one of those topics that you could talk about all day long. We talk about it a lot in manager coaching, and it's something that is a big problem in organisations, and it is something that it's looking behind the behaviour. In terms of a little bit of psychology, like our behaviour is the output. So it's like looking at that person's thoughts and emotions before that point, and quite often it is about some kind of jealousy, some kind of fear, there is a reason why they are behaving the way they are. So it is about helping them to have that self-awareness around actually whether they need to get support for themselves, because a lot of people don't realise that they're the way they are and it's coming across the way it is. And I think some people accept in an organisation, there's usually one person, isn't there, that's that particular toxic person. And they go, oh, well, that's just how they are. And it's like, but that's not okay. So I think it is calling it out, but also helping them.
Mm. Yeah.
But I think we should move on, because I think we could talk about it all day long, couldn't we?
We could talk about resilience on and on. We're very resilient talking about resilience, aren't we?
And the next two slides, what I've tried to do here is say, I think as business owners, the next, certainly 6 months, probably 12 months, I think in the world of employment law, we're going to see a lot of changes. And I think your organisation is going to need to be resilient to responding to these changes and adapting, being agile. So what I've tried to do is say, look, we can't predict the future, but we can identify some trends that I predict we're going to see ever more so in the next 12 months. And partly that's just the general way that the world of employment is going. But I think it's also based on the election. we've got a reasonably good idea, I think, who's going to win. I've read Labour's Make Work Pay plan, and that's where some of this comes from. But I think even if that isn't the way the result goes, I think these will still stand. I might just make reference to some of the things Labour have suggested they're going to do, because I think that's probably the most helpful. Look, I think the first one, and we've seen this in the last sort of 2 years or since COVID probably, and it's only going to get more so, is the demand for transparency. And I think there are legislative pushes or reasons for this, but there are also employee-led reasons for this. So if we look at the legislative ones first, the demand for organisations to be more open and transparent. We already have the equal pay gap reporting for businesses with more than 250 people. In the US, we see many states now have made it law to provide a pay range on job adverts. We've got the EU pay directive coming in Europe. And look, whilst that doesn't impact us directly, I think if the US and Europe are going down that route and they're starting to put legislation in for transparency, it's only going to be a matter of time before it comes to the UK. I really believe that. But I actually think that we'll get to that place probably more for employee-led reasons before we get there for legislation-based reasons. I think if you look, there's such an increased demand from job seekers and employees to have that pay transparency in job adverts that they're not accepting competitive as much as they were. It's such a broad term, or competitive and generous benefits, or a kind of holding statement like that. I think there is a real demand from job seekers to start saying, what does that actually mean? What actually is the pay range for this job?
Do you think, Helen, that people don't apply for jobs based on not having a pay? Because I know when I was looking for work, if it didn't have pay on it, I was like, well, I don't know what level it's at, so I don't know whether it meets my needs or not.
I think there is a gender difference in that as well that's been proven, that that women particularly are less likely to apply for things where they're uncertain of the detail, whereas guys maybe are more likely to do that. And I think also it's a complete waste of a company's time if they're not clear and transparent about pay and benefits, because you might have a job that looks a little bit vague but kind of sits between a band, and the top end band is something that that you're willing to pay, but you're not going to pay past that band. And then you get people applying who maybe are looking for a higher salary, and then you're into a whole heap of negotiation, like, no, you can't, no, we can't go that high. It's a whole heap of work that doesn't need to happen if there's some clarity in the first place. And I think, yes, put a band on there so that you get a spectrum of the market that's out there for that particular role. But you need to make it really clear. And I think benefits need to be on there as well. We now put benefits high up on our marketing and advertising for clients because, yes, there are small and medium-sized businesses without loads and loads of benefits, like the traditional benefits, but there are loads of things that we can say about that business that would attract a candidate in, because they are about themselves. They're not about, at the end of the day, you're not going to apply to a job because, for the company's benefit, you're applying to a job for your own benefit. So they need to know from the offset what that looks like. So I would say transparency. We have a rule that we do not advertise or market roles for clients that won't put a salary against it. There's just no point.
Yeah, and I think that I've seen that as an increasing trend, not necessarily just recruiters, but people who own big forums or community groups on, let's say, LinkedIn, and they're just refusing to put anything on that doesn't have that pay range. I think similarly, flexibility is something we've seen, but that trend is only going to increase. If we look at the changes that happened in April, where it's now a day one right to request flexibility. You can now make 2 flexible working requests in a 12-month period, whereas it was only 1 before. And actually the requirement of an employee to justify why they want it and how the business can respond, that's gone. It's now easier for employees to make flexible working requests. They can make them from day one, and they can make 2 in a 12-month period as opposed to 1. Now, Labour have said that they're going to make flexibility a default rather than a day one right. What that exactly means, I don't think anyone knows, but it does signal that this is just going to be increasingly a requirement for businesses to be flexible. And I think we're seeing a real push. I'm certainly seeing a real push from candidates and individuals for that flexibility. And Helen, I'm sure you can add to that.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a push for hybrid, more than remote, actually. I'm not getting many requests for remote, more hybrid, like 2 or 3 days in the office. But people will reject roles, even if you think, we had a conversation in the office the other day. We had a candidate who it was a 3-day hybrid, so 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, and she wanted 2 days she wanted to have the 3 days at home, and she rejected the job over that 1 day. So people are becoming much more discerning about what they're looking for. But interestingly, I don't know what you guys think, but I'm seeing a disconnect between what businesses are asking for and what people actually want. I'm seeing a real push to get people back in the office, to have, people in the office environment, and maybe offering 1 day flexible or 1 day working from home, maybe after probation. And a lot of the more hybrid roles, there is still hybrid out there, don't get me wrong, and there are still companies offering it and offering it to a good degree. But I am seeing people wanting more people back in the office than ever have before.
I think it's a really interesting flexibility in terms of what we're working with is really interesting, because you've got lots of bits to it. It's not as straightforward, because obviously some companies need people in the office. But what we know is people who are neurodivergent struggle when there's lots of things going on. So if you're in an office environment and you've got different people having phone conversations, they cannot manage to do any deep work in that kind of environment. So what we're more aware of is, I guess, different people, like the whole equality diversity thing. There's so many more things that are to take into consideration than there was before. And it all comes down to working on individuals' energy levels and different times that work for people. And, I've got people that, we're working with that they prefer to start work at 6 or start work at 8, or, they want to work into the evening because they want to do it around the children. And so actually they want to be able to pick the kids up from school, but then they want to work a bit later. And so you're getting a scenario where people are not just wanting remote or in person, but you're getting a lot more people wanting loads of different things. And if you are an organisation that are saying no to a lot of this, what you'll get is either people leaving, or you'll get people who are maybe moving the mouse, or like present but not present. So presenteeism is becoming a massive problem at the minute, because if you're told to do something, which a lot of businesses are now kind of saying, we want you in 3 days a week, or we want you in full time, people have had a taste of actually the fact that it doesn't need to be like that. And I think it goes back to that transparency piece around trusting people to do the work, and again around processes, which you talked about in terms of resilience. If the organisations don't have the processes to support people to be flexible, then that also causes quite a lot of problems in terms of like the difference between the organisation and the individual.
Yeah. I think it's also down to productivity as well, from the point of view, because I talk to a lot of business owners, and I think it's causing a massive problem for SMEs who don't have huge teams dealing with this shift. They're having to actually deal with the shift themselves, and some of them are very resistant to it because their working career had none of this flexibility or compromise at all. It was like you come in, you work many hours a week and you go home. So they're having to adjust their mindset to what is actual now. But I think Paul's point about being very role descriptive, this is your role, because there's going to be roles where you have to be in an office or a factory or a manufacturing plant or whatever, because the thing that you're doing your job on is in that place. Yeah. So you cannot do that from home. So if you're very specific about the role involved and again with the benefits of it, and all of the stuff that's connected to it, and the person who does that job knows what they're getting into from the offset, then there is less room for for issues and problems. So setting the boundaries from the offset is really, really important. But it's also looking at ways where, you know, I've got clients who have remote workers, they have hybrid workers, they have people, you know, they have all this diversity going on in the office, but it can cause massive problems when you shift a job role. So a job role shifts and they're like, well, actually, now you need to come in the office 3 days a week, but you've been working remotely from home. And the person's like, what? But, you know, I've been working from home. Why? And because of the nature of the role. So it's about setting those boundaries clearly from the offset, but also then maybe having some flexibility of policy for people who are working differently to other people so that everyone feels on an equitable footing.
Yeah. And the other thing is making sure that the offices are fit for purpose, especially small businesses. The amount of people I speak to where they go, well, we don't have double screens, we don't have you know, a proper setup with a proper desk, and it's hot desking and there's not enough desks for everybody that needs a desk. And, you know, like I've worked in organisations where I've propped my laptop up on a bin because there was nowhere else to sit. You know, it can get ridiculous. So it is kind of making sure that if you are putting things in place, that especially people that have physical issues or things like that can have like a proper chair, that you've got the OcuHealth stuff in place, all the stuff that you know, a lot of small businesses don't do because they just go, well, here's a desk. And so a lot of people go, well, actually it's not conducive to A, be productive, and B, actually be in the office. And it's thinking about why you're in the offices, isn't it? Like if you're, you know, if you're wanting sort of group ideas and group feedback, it's really important to get everybody together. I think it makes a massive difference doing something in person than doing it on Teams or Zoom or whatever. But there are a lot of things within all of these decrees of like, you have to come back in 3 days a week or 2 days a week. I think as soon as you say to people, you have to do something, people are resistant to it. So I think it is kind of how the message is delivered as well that makes a big impact.
And I'll come on to this in the next slide, but I think it's beneficial saying it now, is a lot of the conversation on flexibility, remote working, etc., I think really centers on almost being a threat for small businesses and how do we respond to this. But actually, I see it as a huge opportunity, especially for small businesses, where if you look at some of the global corporations, they are really struggling with flexible working, the need to bring people back, not bring people back. You know, they've got thousands, tens of thousands of employees, and they're trying to put a policy in place that is more of a blanket policy potentially, so that they can manage their size, that they're not able to be as agile and as kind of flexible as an organisation. And a lot are making a real mess of it. And it's all, you know, pick up the paper almost any day and there's an example of an organisation like that. Where that is a huge opportunity for small businesses is actually there's talent out there now that I think wouldn't have been available to smaller businesses, you know, pre-COVID. But actually now, like you said, people have seen the benefits. People who never would have dreamt of working from home have experienced the benefits, and a lot really liked it and want to continue. So if you can find a way as an organisation of making that work, the access to talent you have, and it's the people who are willing to take, you know, potentially take a cut in their pay to come and get that flexibility because they value it so highly. Or if you can find a way of tapping into, and it's a horrible phrase, but the economically inactive, you know, those perhaps at the other end of their, the end of their career or towards the end of their career than the beginning. If you can find a work pattern that works for them, and maybe it's part-time, it's during the day, it's in the morning, something like that, where they don't have to spend all their time at work, you can get such skills and experience that, as I said, I just don't think wouldn't have been available, you know, 6 years ago. So try and view it as a huge opportunity as well as something, you know, a threat that needs to be dealt with.
I think fractional working is becoming a really big thing. And, you know, I know as a business that's growing myself, like I've got a role, it might not be full time, it might be 10 hours a week, it might be 20 hours a week, it might be like little bits here and there. And sometimes when you identify a role in a business, especially when you're growing, you don't know what you need. You don't need it to be full time, but you don't know how many hours until you start working it. So I think it's a really, really good opportunity for small businesses. Absolutely.
And I'll go on to the next slides, because we've made exactly that point. Just really, really briefly, I think there's an acceptance, and a lot of the stigma of mental health is gone. Organisations are seeing how important it is to look at well-being and mental health. But even just from an economic perspective, there's an increased focus in productivity, the impact of lost days, and better awareness of actually how well-being can make your employees more effective, more efficient, and benefit your organisation. And then from a protection point of view, we're seeing increase in leave types. We're seeing reduction of service length requirements for certain roles like flexibility. And I think that the biggest change that is likely to come if we do get a Labour government is the either removal but certainly reduction of the service length requirement for things like unfair dismissal and constructive dismissal, which at the moment for the vast majority of cases is 2 years. There's talk of either that going completely and it being almost a day one right, or them massively reducing it potentially to a year or 6 months. So I think greater employee protection is absolutely coming. And so if I go on to, what can small businesses do? And absolutely, as you've just said, Claire, I think flexible workforce, not flexible working, but a flexible workforce is key. And there's lots of studies that show actually, potentially even as soon as 2025, many organisations, actually 50% of that organisation will be fractional. And what that does, there isn't as much protection as if they were an employee. It gives you a far more flexible cost base and actually able to tap into expertise when you need it, rather than having the risk and the cost of a permanent employee all the time. So as a small business, absolutely embrace that trend, because that can be incredibly helpful for you. I've touched on flexible working. View that as an opportunity, not just a threat. There's a huge access to talent you can get now if you can get that flexible working right, or just embrace it. But I think to Helen's point, be honest as well. If you are an organisation that you can't be flexible, own that. There are many people that don't want flexible working. And if we think just in terms of office or not office, there's loads of people that want to be in an office. Certainly, I would say probably the first 10 years of my career, I would have hated to have worked from home. It'd have been all, I was house sharing. I was living in London or living in another big city and didn't have my own space. Actually, a lot of my social life was work as well. And I would have hated working from home. So you will attract employees who just don't want it. So it's an opportunity, but own what you can do as an organisation. I think pay ranges is something I would advise every organisation, no matter what its size, to start thinking about. The requirement to be more transparent will come, and the more you can get your house in order now, make sure you haven't got any sort of glaring discrepancies between genders or even within the same team, people doing the same role, because once that transparency comes, it can create internal issues. And this doesn't have to be buying really expensive market data from Willis Towers Watson or one of the big providers. The advantage of transparency is there's transparency, so you can just do some research on LinkedIn or on Glassdoor, and that will give you an idea of pay ranges. We'll work with HR consultants who also have access to that kind of information. But I would really recommend start thinking about pay philosophy, pay ranges now, because it's far easier to change now before you are absolutely required to be more transparent. And in a similar way, if you are concerned, actually we can't pay that highly, and we're concerned about the transparency, do think about performance-based rewards as well. Obviously, the advantage is you can put financial targets on those, bonuses or profit-based pay or something like that. And you can ensure that they only pay out when the business hits a certain financial target. And you may find you attract a type of person that is really incentive-driven and likes those performance-based rewards. Obviously, sales is a classic example of where base salaries might not be super competitive, but the potential earnings if they hit targets are huge, and that does attract the type of person. And it can be something a smaller business can do, perhaps to mitigate not being able to pay the base salaries of a larger corporate.
I think it's also good to add that you can make that based on profit in a business. So if you do it on, I know a few of my clients who do this, and everybody gets a piece of the pie. It's not just the sales team or the account management team or whatever. The whole company benefits. And I would say that's, and it's not a few pounds here or there. It's considerable. It's it's not life-changing money, but it's a holiday or a really great long weekend or whatever. It's enough to be able to treat yourself to something that you wouldn't normally have had.
Yeah.
And I think what it does is it cements them within the business. And if you're very transparent about how the business is performing, they become part of the business. Yeah. And because not that many companies do that, it's a way of elevating you and differentiating you from other companies, and also retaining staff because they're less likely to go somewhere else where they're not getting that benefit.
Yeah, the thing with that is also not thinking just about financial. I think a lot of people, when you think about performance-based initiatives or how to support and reward people, they think financial. But there's definitely a growing trend now where people actually don't necessarily need the financial. A lot of people are purpose-driven. They want, or they might want time back. So a lot of companies are looking at things like having an hour and a half a month to do self-development, or having time, if you reach your targets to, you get Friday afternoons off or something like that. There's a growing trend to actually look at different things, especially if you're a small business that doesn't have cash flow, because I think, we'd all love to be able to give people £1,000 for doing certain things, or, but sometimes businesses don't have that luxury. And so it's looking at where you're at and what's important to you and your staff. And that's about finding out from them,
That's a really good example, and I think you can be really clever with it as well. One of my examples I really like is organisations who operate something like a compressed working week, or maybe it's a 9-day fortnight where you might work an extra hour each day, but then you get the second Friday off, or you get 2 Fridays off a month. But they don't do it all year round. What they'll do is, one of the organisations, they're a very cyclical business, and actually the summer months were really quiet. So they introduced it during the summer months. They knew they had a lot of working parents who actually a Friday off or every other Friday off during the school holidays was hugely beneficial to them, and they didn't have to pay for childcare or after school clubs, and just got to spend a bit more time with their kids. And they put that in. It actually didn't cost the business anything because they were working their contracted hours. It was a really slow period anyway, so half the workforce being off on a Friday didn't impact them hugely, but it was so valued by employees, and it was a big benefit they shouted about, even though it was only like maybe 2 months a year. It was a really big benefit that helped them attract people. So, thinking about what you can give away that's valuable, but actually doesn't cost you too much as an organisation can have a huge impact.
And we do the same on days like today, like it is swelty hot today, isn't it, over in the UK? It's like beautifully warm. We've been moaning for months about the weather being crap, but it's lovely today. But even on days like today, like just being able to say to your staff, go and take an extra hour lunch break, or finish at 4 today, or, if they're remote working, like making sure that they've got a setup, because a lot of people are sitting in stuffy rooms, don't have aircon luxury, offices. So it's kind of, like we often say to our staff, go and enjoy the weather, go down the beach, go and do something for an hour, because it doesn't happen very often. And then the days when it is rubbish, you can pick up the slack, So yeah. It is finding that thing that you can do to support people in a different way.
I would say that we've done our hour, people. So I know
minutes. Is there any? I guess it's like is there any questions in the chat? Is there anything that anybody wants to ask?
The only thing, and just 1 minute, but I think so much of what we've said, the key part of that is having good quality managers and good quality line managers. Everything we've said about resilience, about retention, about the future, the way work's going, your managers are absolutely key. And I really think for a small business, one of, if not the best investment you can make is ensuring that your managers, though, if you don't manage everyone yourself, that those who do are upskilled and know what they're doing, because it has such an impact on your organisation, and all of these are mitigated but by how good the manager is.
A recent thing that looked into the Great Resignation found 96% of people leave because of their manager. Yeah. That's massive.
Yeah.
And that is massively what we're working towards at the minute, is supporting managers. And embedding it as well. There's no point doing a 1-day training course or a 2-day training course. You've got to support them on a regular and consistent basis to really embed things. So we love working with the managers. It's the biggest place to get change and resilience in an organisation, because they have the hard work of dealing with the top down as well as bottom up. So things get stuck quite a lot, and they're expected to do a lot more now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was so interesting.
And
if anyone, this has been recorded, so we will be sending it out to anyone who's signed up, so that you'll get it and you'll be able to replay it with Paul's slides on as well. So thank you so much for your time. That was brilliant, really insightful. And Claire, have you got anything to add?
Don't think so. Obviously, we are looking at organising the next one, which will be in September. So if anyone has any urges for any particular nuggets of information that they want from us, then do let us know, because we're starting to make plans for that now. And, you know, we want to make these things useful for you guys. So anything that you're struggling with or your big challenges, we'd love to get stuck in and help you make some changes.
Thanks a lot. Nice to see you both.
Thank
Take
you.
care.